Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me today is going to be Scott Roberts. And we're going to talk about his newest book, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim. Now, I had him on the phone just a minute ago, and he wasn't quite ready yet. So I'm going to call him back here in just a second. Want to also remind everybody, before I do call him, for one thing, that, well, let me get to it. I had the number right here in front of me a minute ago. I'll get the call-in number out of the way real quick. Is 832-632-7904. Please feel free to call in and ask questions. And you can also come to www.paranormalpalace.com, get a free account, and log into the chat room, and you can chat with us and ask questions in there. Now, real quick, let me see if I can get Scott on the line with us.
Royce.
Hello, Scott.
I'm here.
Okay, this is, well, you know the volume. You just said hi, Royce. Okay,
oh.
Just wanted to let you know we're already live and on the air. I went ahead and did
Fantastic.
a sort of quick introduction while I was waiting to call you so you'd have a little bit more time to, get to a stable place.
I sure appreciate that. We were running a little bit behind and missed our exits and stuck on the freeway when you called me. So.
Yeah, I kind of hate when that happens. I've been there. Okay. Well, Scott, I'll tell you what. Real quick, like I was just telling them about, we're going to talk about your book, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim. And also let me tell them real quick before we get too far started, they can learn more about you at your website, www.intrepidmag.com, where you have your own magazine. And I'm going to put that link into the chat room while we're talking so they can get to it. But in the meantime, why don't we get a start here by you kind of telling them, what got you interested in ancient aliens and the Nephilim?
Okay. Well, first of all, I have to say that all of this stuff started when I was a kid. Just like any of us who are into this stuff, we were intrigued by it. We didn't call it intrigue when we were kids. We were just fascinated with science fiction, with monsters, with creepy things, with Star Trek, with aliens and all of that. So I think what always tends to start this for anybody who gets seriously into it is it's stuff that when they were kids they were fascinated by it and their curiosities were piqued. And so I ended up going into Bible school, and I went to Bible college and seminary and all of that in a very fundamental conservative circles. And I had lots of questions about some of these topics that would come up. And I was labeled a troublemaker now because I would ask the questions, and it wasn't the, I think a few of the seminary professors were like, "You're a troublemaker," and they meant it seriously, but the others were like, "You're a troublemaker, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We know exactly what you're talking about, but we just can't teach that here." And some of the questions started coming up with the names of God and the multiplicity of gods and the story of the Nephilim itself. And let me ask this. I'll kind of break it down this way and say, how many people in your audience, and did you go to Sunday school when you were a kid and hear the stories of Noah and the Ark and things like that? How often were you taught that this story of the Nephilim was connected to Noah and the Ark story? It's the prelude or the preamble to the story itself. And it talks about non-human beings coming down and intermingling with human women and having children by them, known as the Nephilim. And this was connected inextricably to the flood story. And as I started asking questions and not getting satisfactory answers, I started looking for, in all different types of places, researching this out over the years, and it really culminated in, I've got to write a book about this. Or it's really somebody else said to me, I got to get you in touch with my publisher and you need to submit this. You need to write this story down. And so a couple of years ago, I started it and throwing words on a page and saying, look, I'm trying to write a book on this topic, like the million other books that people are trying to write out there. And it wasn't until about this time last year I was contracted by New Page Books to actually do it. And then it became... as I said in the book, I said one of the things I learned writing a book is it's much more daunting finishing a book than it is writing a book. So,
well, yeah,
that's where it all
I've tried
got to
before.
start.
I have tried to write a book before, or at least get an article, and it seems to me like you think you're shooting for a goal and an objective, and the more you write, the more you want to write about.
Exactly.
Oh, I just remembered I wanted to add this. I just remember I want to add that. Then you begin to wonder, is there any...
I look at the book even now. There were some of my views on this stuff that changed as I was writing the book. I would go back to chapters I had written months before and say, wait a minute, that's different now. There's more information I found here. And even since the book has been published, there's not so much new information as new angles and new ways to approach it and new things to think about. That's why now New Page Books has since, this book just released in February, and just last month they contracted me to write the follow-up to this book. And it's to pick up where it kind of leaves off with the bloodlines that were established with the Nephilim.
Oh, we've got to come back and talk about that.
I'd love to. So I'm in the midst of that now. That manuscript is due in July. So it'll allow me to fill in a couple of holes and gaps and take off where we kind of left off with Nephilim.
Okay, now, real quick, before we go on, are you by any chance outside on that cell phone?
I am outside, and I'm trying to look for a place to get inside right now, or a quiet place. I got you.
So, I just wondered because I heard something in the background, and I didn't mean to offend you or anything, but I kind of had a feeling that was it.
There's going to be a lot of ambient noise if I don't find a place to get indoors here.
Well, we'll make it the best.
My wife just dropped me at the building where we were supposed to go into this meeting. She's going into the meeting, and I'm outside. So.
Okay. Well, let's just do the best we can with what we have got. And one of the first things I wanted to ask you about was I went over to Warwick, which New Page, markets, I think, through Warwick, and I get guests through Warwick, roundabout way thing. But anyway, one of the things I noticed on their campaign for you was on the thing they send out, the show description or whatever, the media thing. It's gotten high, bold letters right at the very top. New evidence of a hybrid race among us. Do the Nephilim walk in our world? And I got to tell you, that caught my eye because I've heard people theorize on this here before, and I thought I would ask you, do you have new evidence that they're among us now?
I will be honest with you and say some of that is the way they PR these things. They get an idea of what's in your book and they PR things, and they build up a couple of key phrases is what they do. Is there new evidence that they are among us today? I don't think any real newer evidence than has always been there. It's just I bring a little different light to it. And I believe that they are among us today in a couple of different forms. And this is why I talked about the whole bloodline issue. I believe there is a bloodline of the Nephilim that has been established and still exists on this planet today. And I think it starts to link even more and more than I thought so when I wrote Nephilim. It starts to link into more and more of the ancient alien theory. And this is where I'm picking up, I hate to put it this way. It's in the book I'm writing now. It's called The Secret History of the Reptilians, and it's subtitled The Pervasive Presence of the Serpent in Human History, Religion, and Alien Mythos. And this is where I'm picking up kind of where I've left off with this. But the first book, the Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, which we're talking about today, really sets the stage for this. It sets the stage for saying, this isn't just a Bible story. This isn't just a mythological tale. These are events that are spread over so many ancient cultures that you can't ignore it. And many of these, even if you hail to Judeo-Christianity as your roots, these religions establish these facts. But there are other religions that establish the same thing. There are other ancient writings that establish the same thing. And I believe that they're with us today. As we talk more in this conversation, I can get into even the demonic aspect, where with the rise of all demonology nowadays, and, you know, it's not just ghost hunting and things like that, paranormal interest. Everybody's got to be a demonologist. You know, because, you know, it's the new craze out there. I want to be a demonologist because it's cooler than saying I'm a ghost hunter. And many of those people don't know what, no pun intended, what the hell they're dealing with. And I believe that the Nephilim are what is represented in the demonic. You've got in the book of Enoch, and we can talk about more of this later, where he establishes a lot of the evil spirit activity that is alive in the world today is the remnants of the Nephilim in spirit form. And I can give you more of that information as we get into it. So are they among us today? Yeah, I believe they are in physical flesh and blood form, and I think they're also there in spirit form.
But do you think it's possible that perhaps we weren't just exactly, you know, dealing with the Nephilim alone, that perhaps some of the stories of the ancient aliens were actually, you know, in physical form as well as in spiritual form?
Oh, yes, definitely. I believe this. I believe that many of the things that ancient mankind encountered, these non-human entities, which I believe existed, there's no reason to discount it other than to say, I'm a scientist and I'm a skeptic, and of course that doesn't exist because I can't quantify it or measure it by the scientific method. But I don't think that counts all the time. I think there are things that happen, and ancient mankind encountered beings whom ancient mankind ascribed to gods, angels, devils, demons, and everything in between. And my belief is this, and I think it's borne out in all the research I've done and many others have done, is that as much as I hate saying it, because I came out of the Christian faith, that's my whole foundation and my background, and I still haven't thrown out the baby with the bathwater, but at the same time I say, wait a minute, this story is too big and it extends far beyond Judeo-Christianity. So ancient man obviously ascribed titles to the things that he encountered.
Oh, yeah.
And that being, did he encounter non-human intelligences? Yes. Were they gods? Maybe. Were they aliens? Maybe. And this is where they all start to cross over and the waters get really muddy. And you have to start determining what is man's religion or dogma placed on top of something that they experience, which is not dogmatic at all. And I think that's the great danger, is once a religion gets established around something, religion contains dogma. Dogma immediately starts closing doors.
Yeah. And
not leaving windows or side doors open for any possibilities of something different than what their dogma says. So, yeah, I believe ancient mankind encountered non-human entities, because the biblical version, which is where I started my study, because that's the source point of the word Nephilim, it's a Hebrew word. So when I started there, I didn't end up there, because I'm finding that the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, the book of Genesis, where you find these, the book of Enoch, which is an apocryphal book of Hebrew scripture, that all of these books are simply a Hebrew religious version of the same events you find in over 600 different cultures in ancient times.
Well, I'm going to be kind of honest with you from my standpoint, because I've done a lot of study on this, and I used to be a Sunday school teacher, and I'm still a believer in God, and I still, you know, I don't want to throw no baby out with the bathwater either, but from the study that I've done in this here, it seems like somewhere along the way, it seems like the church, the early church in particular, the Catholic Church, kind of become the pawn of the Nephilim, and that it's kind of like a false religion now. Now,
the Nephilim is a false religion, you're saying?
No, the actual Catholic Church religion. But it's kind of like they kind of took the place of the job the Nephilim were doing at one point in time.
Well, I think you're right. I think, once again, as I already stated, when you get a religious dogma taking over in these things, that is where you're going to find that religion that is built on top of these things is the thing that takes over the story, so to speak. And they put their own twist on it, their own religious viewpoint on it. For instance, in the Baptist church, I was never, as I mentioned already, I was never taught that the Nephilim was part of the flood story. Nor was I made aware that the flood story exists in, this is where the 600 plus ancient cultures come in. They all have their versions of the flood story. And they all have different casts of characters, different courses of events. But common to most every ancient flood account is the common thread of non-human interaction with human women and the bequeathing of a race that some deity or superior power sought to destroy by the use of this great flood. And that's where all the common threads start kicking into place. And the Roman Catholic Church, they will say this is the only truth. But that's where the problem begins when you look at the story just from a biblical standpoint. You're only looking at one source. There's many other sources for the story.
Well, see, that's part of the reason why I said what I did about the Catholic Church earlier, is I believe it was them. I think Constantine had, Jerome, go through there and take some of these books out. Amongst them, I believe, was the book of Enoch. And I got to tell you, I've been to the library. I've read the book of Enoch. And I noticed that there was nothing in there that really disagreed with the rest of the Bible. It's just that it had the part filled in from Genesis 6:4 that you're talking about the Nephilim.
What I believe you've got in the book of Genesis, I believe there's no shadow of a doubt in my mind that Moses, the historical Moses, is the man who authored the book of Genesis. It's ascribed to him, as are the next 4 books in the Old Testament. I don't think there's any reason to doubt that. I go into great pains in my book to establish that. But when Moses writes this story in the book of Genesis, in chapter 6, he's only got 4 to 5 verses that talk about the story of the Nephilim. Right. And that's it. It's like a mere mention. But then you go to...
Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, I thought I lost you for a minute. I'm sorry.
Oh, I had something beep into my phone, that's all. That's one of the drawbacks, I think, to talking on the cell phone is... and not being at a studio seat. But I believe Moses, in this brief mention of the Nephilim, all he did was take data that already existed in the existent book of Enoch. Now, Enoch only dates, the copy that we have, only dates back to the 4th century BC. But, and people say, well, this can't possibly be because of this and this. Well, the fact is that the 4th century BC is a copy of the much older story. A copy of the much older book, just like most of the books we have in the Bible today. We don't have the original penned by the hand of Moses or penned by the hand of the Apostle Paul. We don't have those. We have copies of those that were written centuries later, some of them. They were copies of copies of copies. And Moses, if you go to that account in the book of Enoch, which starts talking about the flood story and starts talking about, it has the same exact verbiage as Moses uses when he starts talking about the Nephilim. But that story that Moses has written down has earmarks in the Hebrew of having been edited because it is in a totally different style as the rest of the book of Genesis. And so either one of two things. Either Moses had the original story, just as brief as it was, and a guy named Enoch came along, or somebody who took the name Enoch and greatly elaborated on it, or Moses, in a sense, copied his information from an extant source that already existed. And the interesting thing about that is when you look at other stories of the Old Testament, you look at the creation stories, you look at all of the names of God in the Old Testament and all these things that Moses used when he's writing these in the book of Genesis, they all are similar to the Sumerian culture, which existed 3,000 years earlier.
Oh, yeah.
And the name for God, the name for Yahweh, Jehovah, all of these names and the events of Eden and the events of the gods and interacting and the dispensing of knowledge and and the cursing of those who had fallen away. That all is found in the Sumerian culture and their religious writings. And you say, well, what happened? What came first, the chicken or the egg? Was it a much older story? Because Moses lived in the 14th century BC. And he did his writing in the 14th century BC. 15th century, I guess it is. He's thinking backwards here. And so, but the Sumerian culture was the 4500s or the 4800s BC. And so Moses they didn't borrow from Moses. I believe Moses borrowed from them the names of their gods. And etymologically speaking, the Sumerian language and religion as it spread out over the next few thousand years and came into the land of Canaan, the Canaanite culture, which is where the Hebrew culture rose out and the Jewish religion rose out. All of those names of their gods and those things that happened, they are all evolutions of the same word, like in the Sumerian culture. Their caste of gods, their pantheon of gods was the Anunnaki. And the lead god of the Anunnaki, the head god, was Elil, E-L-I-L. And El is the name that you find etymologically developing, evolutionarily speaking, from the Sumerian language down to the Canaanite language and eventually into Hebrew, because El is the base name for God, E-L. In the Old Testament, El for El Shaddai, Elohim, all of these names of God. You've got, go back to the Sumerian culture. You've got Elil's brother god, Enki, also known as Ea. He was like the first freedom fighter that was liberating the humans, teaching them forbidden knowledges, just like the parents of the Nephilim did in the biblical account. He's teaching forbidden knowledges. He is cast down. He is condemned with he and his followers because they broke the code, so to speak, by teaching humans forbidden knowledge. And they're given the earth to dwell in. The subterranean caverns of the earth is where they will dwell forever. Now, Enki, or Ea, as he's known in the Akkadian text, the neighbors to the Sumerians, Ea is the same base word 3,000 years later that you found is base for YWH, Yahweh. So Ea, from the Sumerian culture, became Yahweh, which is the same word as Jehovah. And so you find all of these similarities in these much older texts. And yet Moses talks about them in a text written 3,000 years later. So only he's put his own spin on them.
Yeah.
So you want to ask, was there some proto-religion that existed prior to even the Sumerian culture where the stories were all set in place already and everybody developed their own version? Or are we seeing, as we see from Sumeria to Hebrew over that 3,000-year evolution, are we seeing a religion that's been developed by each different group, each different people, each different religion? They take and they borrow what they want and they expand on it. Kind of like the Catholic Church building its cathedrals on all the pagan sites throughout the Celtic regions. And so you've got, in more modern history, or recent history, if you will, comparatively speaking, we borrow from the old and develop the new off of it. And I think that's exactly what Moses did in the book of Genesis.
Okay, now that's a very good possibility, but more specifically, I think what I was getting at was that I kind of thought that perhaps the reason that the book of Enoch had been removed from the main Canaan was because it did go into describing these Nephilim. I don't think the early church wanted that in there. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I think you've hit on a key phrase there. I don't think the church wanted that in there. And I think what happened, remember what Constantine was trying to do when he convoked these first of these councils. He was trying to consolidate power as the first Christian emperor of Rome. Now, he was, as we all know, he was nothing, he was anything but a Christian. But he used that to politically further and establish and consolidate his kingdom or his empire. And he was trying to establish two things. One God equals one emperor, one religion equals one empire. And Constantine hated the division in the church because of this. He thought they were too divisive, too splintered, and he said, you will find unanimity because this is the platform off of which I'm establishing my empire. And when you get the Roman emperor saying, you will find unanimity on which books belong in the Bible and which ones don't, there's kind of a subtext of or else in there. And So it's not that all these bishops agreed that the Book of Enoch was non-scriptural and therefore should be excluded from the canon of Scripture. I think it was because, well, I know it was because they could not find unanimity on it. The only books that they allowed in the canon of Scripture were the ones that they all unanimously decided were Scripture. That's why you've only got 4 Gospels out of 60 Gospels. Things like that. And that's why I believe the Book of Enoch is in the apocryphal books as opposed to the Scripture of the canon of Scripture.
Which the Book of Enoch was still considered a very important book by many of the early churches. I think including the church at Jerusalem, wasn't it?
Yes, the Jerusalem Bible contains it. You've also got many of the Old Testament prophets who wrote books quote from the Book of Enoch. You've got Peter in the New Testament, Paul in the New Testament, who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, quote from the Book of Enoch. You have Jesus quotes from the Book of Enoch himself in the Gospels. And so I used to say rather tongue-in-cheek, I'd say, well, hey, if it's good enough for Jesus, the Savior, to quote from it, it's good enough for me. It must be Scripture.
So it must be old-time religion.
Yeah, give me that. Old-time religion.
I'm sorry, Scott, I just had to throw that in there.
Absolutely. Just sing it for us. That'd be even better.
No, that would torture you.
So there is in and amongst all of this, on a personal level for me, a struggle that hits my faith issues. Because I grew up my whole life, was educated in these things. I had my questions and I had my doubts about things. But when I say I didn't throw out the baby with the bathwater, I mean, I still believe in God, very God, His Holy Spirit. I believe in the work of Jesus Christ, His Son. I believe in the redemptive atonement act on the cross and the resurrection. I believe all of that. But what's happening to all of that for me now is saying, when you start to see other parts of Scripture and other stories that are similar to or borrowed from older religions and older cultures, and you see it repeated over and over again in many different cultures and with different events and different name places and different names, what do you do with that information? And so it has created for me, at least on a personal level, a little struggle of faith. I could very easily just cast it all aside and say it's all rubbish because it's obviously just mankind's religion borrowing from one on top of the other, all overlayered, overlapped. Everybody keeps what he wants, changes, adds things that they want for their religion. And as you said, some of these, like the Catholic Church, it was things that they did not want in there, so they did not accept it. Well, it's, aren't you supposed to, if you are in a religion, let's say the Roman Catholic Church, let's just use that for an example, aren't they supposed to take Scripture at face value and not say, oh, I can't go along with that part of Scripture, so I'm going to throw that one out. It's like, what did they do? They had to have criteria by which they measured everything to decide, I'm going to keep this one or I'm going to throw this one out. And that criteria was based on what? It was based on the criteria they established themselves.
Okay. Now, you were talking about the rise and fall of the Nephilim. Now, when I read some other people's work, particularly Zachariah Sitchin, who sadly is no longer with us, he indicated in his books that they did actually leave generally around the time of the wars that Joshua took the Israelites to, during their travels in after the desert, but that they were promised to return. Does your research kind of indicate the same thing?
That's where I am right now. That's the stuff I'm researching now. I did not research into that in great depth for the book for the Rise and Fall of the Nephilim. That's where I am right now and what I'm studying and what I'm researching out. I have not yet located the time period. Something about Zechariah Sitchin. I have not read his works. I've read bits and pieces of his works in order to quote him in certain things. I took him a little bit to task in Nephilim because some of his translation of older words, Sumerian words, and extrapolating them into Hebrew, his interpretations are a little squeezed sometimes to make something fit his argument.
Mike Heisler said the same thing. Yes,
Michael Heiser has a lot to say about it. I think he's got a website called sitchiniswrong.com or .org or something like that. And he takes him to task linguistically. Says if you were going to build a theory or a story or an account based on ancient religion, you better know what the hell the actual, I'm sorry, based on ancient language, you better know what the language says. And he's saying that there were so many squeezes and fits that he has a problem with Sitchin's interpretations. And I do too, at least linguistically. When Sitchin takes one Sumerian word and says, this means rocket ship, he squeezed that to fit. It's like saying the account of Ezekiel with the wheel within the wheel within the wheel and all of that stuff, that account that we see in the Old Testament that's so often talked about as being a physical spaceship of some kind. To say without a doubt that means spaceship, you have to extrapolate that information from your own imagination because it doesn't say that. It looks like it and very possibly could be that, but we don't know that for sure. And that's exactly what Sitchin did to build his case on many things was he took interpretations of words and said it has to mean this because that fits the picture that I'm building here. And there's a great danger in that too. Now, Sitchin might be right for all I know, but his interpretation of language is where I think he made some mistakes and squeezed things to fit. But then again, he's got quite a theory out there. And it's too bad he's gone now and can't defend his theories further. But I think he ran into a lot of people discounting his theories and his writings because of some of the basic things he did by misinterpretation or mistranslation. Let's put it that way. Translation and interpretation are two totally different things. You can I use as an example for that New Testament baptism. You can have all kinds of interpretations of what it means to baptize somebody or how it's supposed to be done. Should I dunk somebody into the water? Should I sprinkle them on the forehead? Should I touch them with oil on their forehead? The only problem you have, that's interpretation. Translation, the Greek word used in the New Testament for baptism was the word baptizo. Baptizo being defined means immersion beneath the water. That's what it means by literal translation of the word. Interpretation would be when you put a twist on it and say, I think I can do it by doing this instead of doing that. There was so much fear of the politics of the church at the time that when they translated the word baptizo from the Greek to English, they said, we can't translate it. It means immersion. We're going to just transliterate it. And they turned the Greek language, the Greek word, into an English word. Baptizo became baptize. And baptize then was open to interpretation. But the word baptizo is not open to translation. So what do you do when you run into that brick wall of translation of the word means immersion, but another denomination will use sprinkling? That's the same thing I'm talking about here with translations of language. Interpretation comes with religion and dogma. Translation comes with looking for fact.
Well, isn't it also true that Sitchin isn't the only one that does this with the language? Many pastors in pulpits and Sunday school teachers, amongst other people, do the same thing as well?
Oh, sure. I'm not thinking of any specifics off the top of my head, but yeah, it happens all the time. I think it happens in the Christian circles I came from. There are things that are given interpretation as opposed to translation. Now, some things are going to be open anyway. When you're talking religious stuff, you're talking open for anybody's interpretation. Any denomination, any dogmatic group's interpretation of something. When you're talking translation of text, you're talking the cold hard fact, and then you have to either operate on the cold hard fact of what the text says, or you apply your interpretation to your particular group. And I think that's the danger we get in. That's why there's so many different religious interpretations, even within Christianity. Why do you have so many denominations that teach so many different modes of practice? Because they put their interpretations on how things are supposed to be done.
Yeah, and when they do it, what they do is they put their own context on it to make it match, because even Mike Heiser will tell you that even anybody that teaches you about reading ancient Sumerian, ancient Hebrew knows that it's such a hard language, the way that it's written and the way the letters are used, that you have to use the context of anything you're reading as the final scale, And then so many people will read it straight out of the Bible, and the context, by the time they deliver it from the pulpit, has reinterpreted it into something new.
Exactly. And I believe that's what's happened with the Nephilim. You have different words, Nephilim. You have different words in different languages, Hebrew to Aramaic, and they have different interpretations. It's like Nephilim does not mean giant, but it was for so many centuries interpreted as meaning giant. That's they were looking at the wrong word, the wrong breakdown of the word itself. The word itself, Nephilim, the base word in the Hebrew is Nephal. And Nephal means to fall, to descend, to come down, to leave one's estate and go to another. It was applied to many different kinds of practices. Many times you saw it talking about military, where a soldier fell in battle. The him is the Hebrew suffix that's put on a word to denote plurality. So Nephilim became those who fell down, those who left their estate and came to another, and so on. Where you get giants from is in the Genesis passage. It says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and they were also known as the heroes of old and the men of renown. The men of renown. That is speaking to a Hebrew phrase that meant the Gibborim, this group that were known as the mighty giants, the warriors, the great warriors and men of valor. And this is where you get the giant interpretation. You also have different places in the Old Testament where when Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt, the Exodus, and they come to the land of Canaan about 2 months later, and they send out the 12 spies to spy the land. Well, they came back, and these spies were saying, we can't go in there. The children of Anak, the Nephilim, are there. They are giants. They make us look like grasshoppers in their sight. Were they talking literally, or were they talking figuratively? If I were to, let me just use a bizarre example. Let's say we were to have a revolution in our country today the way we did 250 years ago. Back then, you could have colonial militia going into churches and meeting halls and little towns and saying, grab your musket and come with us and fight, your muskets and swords. Were they going up against a power that also had tanks and bazookas and atomic bombs? No. They were going up against a force that had muskets and cannons and swords. And nowadays, if the same thing were to happen now, let's say there was a militia to raise up to fight the government of the United States to overthrow it, like the American Revolution. Could you go grab the deer gun out of your cabinet or your 12-gauge shotgun and think you could hold anything up against the United States military? Or would we look like grasshoppers in their sight? Would they be giants and we would be the small ones going up against them, the Davids going up against the Goliaths? So is it a figurative language? I don't know. I know the Gibborim were spoken of being giants, literal giants. And this is where Gibborim applies to the term the mighty men of valor, the heroes of old, the men of renown, as attached to the Nephilim.
Right. Now, while you were talking, we got a question in the chat. Actually, before we go to that question, I want to bring this one here out. It was not a question, but she made a really nice point when we were talking about those interpretations. Mayreed typed in there, we always interpret our reality through the medium of our own point of view and mindset. She put that in there, and I thought to myself, well, that pretty well sums it up about as well as anything can.
Sure does. Now, of course, when you're talking about these great councils that were put together to decide things, where like the Council of Nicaea, you had 300 bishops all together. Were they just trying to interpret to the median mindset, or were they interpreting things that fit into their own politics of the church? And how deeply did they go? How deep did they want to interpret things? Why did they boot some books out of the Bible and keep others? And I think it's like you said, with the it may go beyond just that looking for the common denominator or looking for that median mindset. I think that's what we do as individuals. We say, I'm interpreting that the way it works for me. But I don't think these councils got together and say, how does it work for me? Now, they were saying, we have to do this to create unanimity. And so I think they were very strict in their interpretations of things and very strict in their translations, and they booted some things out on the basis of what fit into their theology. And So she's got a good point there, but I think that's more on that private level. That's on that individual level. And by the way, this is a good place to mention this. Something that makes me bristle and I get so tired of hearing is when people say things like, well, I feel that this is the way it is. I just want to go, oh, you feel that? Feeling is one thing. That's self-interpretation. I can't base what I believe based on, the way I feel, this makes me feel good. And so on. That's what we do. That's the big danger of private interpretation. It might work for you. I mean, that's good for you. That's fine. But if you want to base what you believe on something old or some older theology, you better know what that theology says. And many times, your feelings have absolutely nothing to do with it. It's, my feelings have to be based on what it says and what's there. What are the facts, man? The facts only, man. And that's what I have to base my dogmas on, or base my own personal interpretation of something on. If I want to interpret something different, say, well, I think it was this because I feel God wouldn't be that way or this or that. You know what? That's private interpretation. And you're putting your feeling on something. Now, maybe there's something to that to some point, but when you're trying to talk about facts, I like to hail to that great sage, Indiana Jones. Remember in Raiders of the Lost Ark, he's writing on the chalkboard to his class, and he says, archaeology is not the search for truth. It's the search for fact. He said, if you want truth, go down to so-and-so's philosophy class down the hall. We can philosophize about these things all we want and put our feelings on them all we want. But when we're really digging it out to find out what happened and what's really there, it's the search not for truth. Because truth is in the eye of the beholder. It's in the eye of the perceiver. Truth becomes something else to the personal feeling. We're looking for the fact. Because facts. I've got this quote on my email, at the end of my email, by John Adams. And he said, facts are things that are established. I don't know the quote off the top of my head, but he says, facts are irrevocable things. No matter what your feeling is, no matter the disposition of your soul, no matter what you want it to be, facts cannot be erased by feelings. Facts is what he was saying. And I think that is what this is all about at its base, is if you're trying to find out something that happened, do you want to filter it through religion, or filter it through the way I feel it might have been, or do you want to filter all your facts through the fact that they are facts? Not to be redundant there, but you want to look at what the facts are, and then take it from there and see how all the different religions interpreted them.
Right.
There might be something to interpretation. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm saying it's not a good thing when you're trying to establish fact.
Well, you shouldn't be turning your interpretation into fact, which is what many people do.
Exactly. When you take your interpretation and make it the fact of what you believe, you've created your own religious dogma. I look at it this way. In my book, the first chapter is called Science Almighty. And what I'm doing is trying to kick out the props a little bit of science and skepticism and say, they approach from this angle, and I get that. They're looking for the facts, but sometimes you got to look through the veils that can't be pierced. You've got to try to find ways to find out what's there and get the information. And I know Richard Dawkins, I quoted in my book, he's one of the most leading evolutionary biologists out there, and an atheist. But on top of being just an atheist, he's a crusading atheist. Something I found that is very distasteful about the scientific community is they have an almost crusading atheism about them. And when they have a crusading atheism, that starts to overtake what they're trying to teach. Because when you use science or skepticism to, in a sense, decry or dissemble a dogmatic religion somewhere or a faith of some kind, Dawkins himself said spirituality and religion, or religion and faith, are trash, he said. A direct quote from him. Now, when they try to do that, kind of thing, what they are doing is science is establishing itself as the surrogate religion, or the surrogate for religion, the surrogate for God, because they are establishing themselves as knowing better, or what you believe religiously or dogmatically or spiritually being trash. You need to go to what science tells you. So in a sense, science is establishing itself as the new religion. They're becoming the new absolute. And when you've got these crusading atheists in the scientific community that are doing this, that's exactly what you're ending up with. Science has become the new religion, at least in scientific circles.
Okay, now, we've got a couple questions by Leslie. It was Mary made the comment, but it was Leslie who asked the questions. And he was wanting to know, well, I had a question up here a minute ago. I think he was wanting to know if, I thought I pasted it earlier, but I don't see it now. But if I remember correctly, he wanted to know if, the Nephilim had created any secret societies, any cults, any religions, or anything like that, in other words.
Okay. There's nothing I find that says the Nephilim went out and established this secret society. But what I am researching right now for this book on the reptilians is that whole notion that there is something to the bloodlines of the Nephilim, that they became the Merovingian Bloodlines, the whole Grail story and the bloodlines of the Holy Grail, and all of these things start to fit into the bloodlines of the Merovingian, the bloodline of the Nephilim. You've got Hitler himself used that. The whole eugenics issue with Nazi Germany, the Socialist Party. What was Hitler trying to establish? He wanted to establish that there was a race that was superior to another race, to every other race. And he would use the bloodlines, literally, of the Nephilim to do that. Many of your writers in these contexts will talk about the Freemasons and the Cathars and how all of this sprung up out of the whole Merovingian bloodline issue, that was all linked to the Nephilim and this bloodline that exists, the bloodline of the serpent. And so that's why I'm looking into this for the next book, is to dig into that question in particular. You've got guys like this person who asked the question, many out there might know who David Icke is.
I know who David Icke is. I got to tell you, that man's got some really good research done, but I come to question him about shape-shifting lizards. I mean, is it impossible? No, but what's the likelihood?
Well, he bases a lot of his stuff on Sitchin's writings and on some of the stuff that I'm studying for this book, the older religions back into the Sumerian culture. The Anunnaki were said to have been reptilian in nature. You've got all this pervasive presence of the serpent and the reptile all through history and mankind's religion. And he, according to Icke, and just to boil it down in the most simplistic terms I can here, without a dissertation on Icke's theories and his movement, is that he believes there is a reptilian race that started it all. They were the ones that enslaved humanity, the Anunnaki. That the brother of Enlil, Enki, Ea, was the freedom fighter who saw the plight of humans, taught them the forbidden knowledges, taught them out of a place called Ea's Den, the den of serpents. And this, out of all these theories, you build this reptilian race. And David Icke will be one that will tell you that behind all the closed doors and the secret societies, behind even the Illuminati and things like that, you've got something going on at play behind even that's pulling all the strings. And he lays it all squarely at the feet of this reptilian race that has been here all throughout human history and is coming back again into human history, but they are pulling all the strings and everything is leading up to that. Now, it's very interesting. Not on the same topic, but similarly, I was talking to John Zaffis in an interview about demonology. And I asked him about, do you think demons affect even world leaders today? And he paused and very quietly said, without a shadow of a doubt. And now this all goes to interpretation. Demonology, demons, are they the same things as the non-human entities that ancient man? It starts to get very convoluted when you look at all the things that could be brought up into that. But Zaffis, a demonologist who says, I believe there is evil spiritual activity working behind everything in the world today, you just extrapolate that over into Icke's teachings. And Icke will tell you that there is a race of aliens, not demons, but they are the same things that are working behind the scenes, only from an extraterrestrial point of view. And before everybody starts looking at this and going, so whack fringe, how can we believe that in our society today? It's as simple as looking to guys like, look at Carl Sagan and his research. Look at Richard Feynman, both the late doctors, both of them, how they talked about how the billions of stars within our galaxy that could host planets like ours, and then the billions upon billions of galaxies like ours that contain these billions upon billions, exponential billions of numbers of possibilities of life like ours existing out there, evolving like ours. And you start thinking about that in scientific terms and say, well, we just don't believe any of them made it here, to do anything, to affect anything in mankind. But what if they did? You've got all these ancient religious writings that seem to talk about beings that did just that. And they did not have the knowledge. This is back when they believed the Earth was the center of the universe. So they had no scientific knowledge to speak of that we do now. But you look at what science is discovering. Is it possible? Yes. Are there things written that start to link into this? Yes, there are. One of the just brief examples is the Dogon in West Africa. They talk about how their gods, they were half amphibian, half human, would come down, and the first act they had to do when they landed in their ships was to build tanks of water they could live in so they could interact with us. According to the Dogon, they came from a star system that, I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's a star system we didn't even know existed back in the 20s when some anthropologists were doing work with them and wrote this all down. We found out only, decades later that this star system actually exists. They already had it mapped out and charted. And you say, where did they gain this knowledge? You look at ancient sites, and I'm drifting a little bit off topic here, but just the rabbit trailing here, but you look at all the ancient sites that exist on the earth today. Ancient religions on different continents, South America to Thailand to the Middle East to Scandinavian countries to America, and you start finding that all these sites line up in grids around the earth. Some of them are exact geo-global opposites of the other. Just one good, for instance, I mentioned in my book, the Nephilim, according to, not the Nephilim, the fathers of the Nephilim, the sons of God, as they're mentioned in Genesis, or the Watchers, as Enoch calls them. They descended to the earth and made a pact to go in amongst human women and to impregnate them, and then they fathered the Nephilim. According to Enoch, they descended on the slopes of Mount Hermon, which is in northern Israel today. And it straddles the Golan Heights between the Syrian and Libyan borders. Not Syrian, Libya, Syria and Lebanon borders. And the interesting little fact about this is that it ties into all this grid work of these ancient sites is that Mount Hermon sits on the 33rd parallel north of the equator. If you trace the 33rd parallel all the way around the world to the globe, to the exact global opposite spot on the globe, on the 33rd parallel north, you know where you end up? You end up at the crash site of Roswell, New Mexico. Now, that's either some great cosmic geo-global coincidence, or there are these grids that start to line up. Now, all of this saying all these ancient religions, when you start looking at as I started talking about the billions of stars, the billions of galaxies, the possibility of life visiting us, and then you start to see all these global coincidences, quote unquote, that seem to line up. Somebody in ancient times knew something we don't. And where did they get that information? And why would all these cultures separate from each other be building on these grids and these lines all around the earth if somebody did not impart that knowledge? And so you've got to build here on this site. Why was that a sacred site? So you start looking at all of this stuff, from David Icke's teachings to Sitchin's teachings to scientific teachings about the universe, and you start putting it all together, and you say there is, just like the story of the Nephilim, there are many cultures that teach these stories from many different religions, but there is a common thread that is the same in all of them. So it's only indicating that with the Nephilim, something huge happened to ancient mankind, so big that every religion wrote about it. same thing with all these things that Ike teaches and all of these. I don't think Ike is totally off. I think I've got my problems with him. I think he's a huge anti-Semite. He is a neo-Nazi in extraterrestrial clothing. And he teaches that, and a lot of these teachings do that. They teach this anti-Semitism. I have a problem with that with him because it becomes a political movement on top of just a theory of creation and a theory of alien races. So you can see, even as I talk to this to the point where I'm out of breath about it, all of this stuff becomes so convoluted and the story is so huge and it involves so much of what we know and it all links in the ancient past that it's boiling it all down and trying to find what is that one thing that happened, or was there a series of things that happened? And I bring it up with the Nephilim is that you see them in all different cultures, by different names and different types of beings, but they exist in so many other cultures. These, I think of the Tuatha De Danann of the Celtic culture, the children of the goddess Danu. They were known as the bright shining kings who descended from heaven, and they brought knowledges with them to teach mankind and raise mankind up, impregnated women in the human race. They receded into the hollow hills, eventually became known as the elven folk. Again, El, the name of God, is there again. So you have all these different cultures that have stories like this. Now, what do you do with all that information? You say something big happened out there. And trying to get around the politics of it all, the religion of it all, the dogmatic theology of it all, is the great task of trying to get to the source point, the facts of what happened.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot to get through on that there, too, because, you know, one of the things I did learn when I was studying all of this here stuff is what you said was true. It's, you know, all convoluted. There's many different facets to it. Just as many as there are different religions in the world today, it's, you know, all diversified so much over the thousands of years. So,
that's right.
Yeah, there's an awful lot going on into that. And, you know, right now, you can learn a lot of information, it seems to me like, but to actually narrow it down and say, this is what happened, that's what happened, there's just so hard to do with so much being, you know, put out there, in other words.
Exactly.
Now, also, Leslie was asking, are they the founders of any noble families? The Nephilim, in other words.
Well, this is, again, you can't point right back directly to the Nephilim. You have to start looking at what's considered to be the bloodlines that came out of the Nephilim. And yeah, you've got all your big families that are supposedly attached to it. I always like to, this is what it always brings up in my mind. There was a movie came out 10 plus years ago with Mike Myers called, So I Married an Axe Murderer. And he plays his own Scottish father in that movie. And there's this scene where his Scottish father is ranting, and he says, it's a little known fact. He says that all the world is ruled by 5 families. He says, the Rothschilds, the Gettys, the Rockefellers. And he goes through this list, and he says, and Colonel Sanders, before he went teats up. And so, you know, this is that was the comic element put into it. But yes, there is something to all these families that have risen up. You start talking about the burger builders. You start talking about the Illuminati. You start talking about all of these things, and then looking at the families that are associated with them that supposedly descended from. It's all linked to the Nephilim and the bloodlines of the Nephilim. And, you know, something I noticed with all the talking I'm doing, I haven't even described what the Nephilim are exactly and what these bloodlines are. You've got a story in Genesis 6 that talks about beings that descended from the heavens. They call them the sons of God, or in the Hebrew, Elohim. Enoch speaks of them as being the watchers, and that they're the ones that descended down, and they had sex with human women, intermingled with them, taught them forbidden knowledges, and bequeathed the race of the Nephilim. And that these Nephilim were what then linked to the flood story. It talks about how, what did we learn about the flood story in Sunday school when we were kids, if you grew up in Judeo-Christian? You could recite it in 8 seconds. God was was pissed off at the wickedness of mankind, so he's going to destroy all the world with a flood and save one family, Noah and his family, because Noah was the only righteous man we read in the Bible. And then the whole thing with the animals and all that is I think, secondary to all of that. And by the way, in case anybody wants to discount that story, well, how could an old guy go out with a net and a rope and gather all these animals? Just keep in mind, the passage never says he did that. It says that God brought them to the ark. So if you want to look at the story as it's literally translated. Well, this story, never did we learn that the Nephilim were connected to this story, but they're the preamble to the story. And when you look in the Hebrew language, the whole purpose of the flood was God wiping out this hybrid race. That it wasn't that man was wicked, it was that they brought wickedness and corruption to the bloodlines of humanity. And that Noah was chosen not because he was the only righteous man, but as the Hebrew says, he was the only pure-blooded man left, pure in all his generations back to Adam, the first man. And then you look at that story, and that gives it a whole different twist. Then you got to go back to the Garden of Eden story, because this is where I believe the Nephilim first come into play. This is where I believe the sons of God first came down. You've got the story of Adam and Eve, creation story, and it matches. It's so similar in content, only with different names and some different events, to every other creation story out there. But you got Adam and Eve, and what happened? The serpent in the garden. He is the one that tempts Eve. She eats the forbidden fruit, gives it to Adam. Poof! They're both next to the fall of mankind. And you wondered why that event would cause them to be naked or cause them to fall. What was the big deal behind that? I never quite understood the impact of all that until you look at who the serpent was. Now, I'm going to ask you, Royce, pop quiz. When we were in Sunday school as kids, who did we learn the serpent in the garden was by name?
Lucifer.
Lucifer, exactly. But did you know that the text never mentions him by name there?
No, in fact, as far as I know, he's only mentioned in Isaiah by that name, maybe
exactly.
Once in Matthew by Jesus.
Thousands of years later, the serpent in the garden is attributed to be Satan or Lucifer or the devil. And now, it's what's interesting, what he's called in Genesis is Nakash, in the Genesis Garden of Eden passage. And Nakash, by definition, means this. It means magician, crafty wizard, trickster, bringer of knowledge, illuminator, bright, shining one. And this is the key thing, this bright, shining one aspect of who Nakash, the serpent, was. Well, it also... I'm going to just jump to the quick here. The Garden of Eden story isn't about eating forbidden fruit, literally. It's about sex. It's all sexual in nature. Nakash came down, impregnated Eve. Eve brought Adam into the act. Adam also impregnates her. She bears twin sons, Cain and Abel. And if you go to all the other creation myths, if you will, all of it, put it all in the box of creation mythological stories, all these first families together were represented by either couples or four couples, as in the Ogdoad of Egypt that came down to the creation mound. You've got all these couples, and there was always a trickster character of some sort that came into the mix. And this trickster, what he did was he impregnated either the wife of the first couple or the daughter of the first couple, and there were always multiple births, twins or triplets or quadruplets. That came of this. And so when you look at the Adam and Eve story, it's no different. It's the Hebrew version of that story. And the Garden of Eden is the Hebrew version of that story. And here's one other fact I want you to see. When you go back to the Anunnaki of the Sumerian culture 3,000 years earlier, when this reptilian race who came from the stars, they were known as star gods according to the Sumerians, they found the humans as roving the fields as wild bands of beasts, and they brought them in and bred them up, gave them intelligence, and they enslaved them. What does it say that they had them doing? Tilling their fields, tending their gardens, also mining natural resources for them. And then it was Enki who came in, the brother of Enlil, who saw their plight, and we know the story from there. But compare that to the Eden story. God had Adam and Eve, and it says he put them in the garden to till the garden and keep the garden for him. There is your more watered-down version of the Sumerian tale. Well, what happens here is Nicaea, the serpent character, came down, impregnates Eve. She has twin sons, one born from Adam, fathered from Adam, one born fathered from Nicaea, Cain and Abel. What happens? Cain murders Abel. We know that story. Well, Cain is the one that is the eldest of the twins. He's the one that's supposed to be the one that the bloodline follows. Now, jump up to all the genealogies in the Old Testament. If you've ever read the Bible or had to study it for any reason at all, you go through the Old Testament and you find all these boring chapter after chapter after chapter of genealogies of, and Moab begat Abram, and Abram begat Lamech, and Lamech had 5 sons and 3 wives, and each of them begat so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. But the Hebrew tradition was they always carried the bloodline. They're tracing the bloodline from Adam. And they always bring it up, or they always trace it traditionally through the eldest born son. Now, here's an interesting thing. I never quite understood why all those things were there until you start getting into the Hebrew story of the Messiah and their version of what this story did and what it meant and what it was really all about. In the Garden of Eden story, where God finds out that they've sinned and they've fallen, he comes down and he curses everybody, curses the serpent, curses Adam and Eve. Mankind is now going to be born in sin forever and so on. Right in that account, in Genesis 3, God talks about the first messianic prophecy, the first prophecy of a coming Messiah. And you have to pardon the noise. I have a train going by me right here. So there is the first messianic prophecy, and it's found in the phrase where he's cursing the serpent, and God says, and you will bruise his heel, but he will crush your head. That is known amongst rabbinic scholars, Christian scholars, all of them alike will not contend that that is nothing but a messianic prophecy. Now, in the Hebrew sense of the word Messiah, it meant kinsman redeemer, the one who would come from us, the one of us. If you've ever gone into church at Christmas time, Jesus was born as he was one of us. There's such great import to that. Why is there Old Testament import to that kinsman redeemer aspect of the Messiah, the coming Messiah? It was because the Messiah, according to the Hebrews, had to be born from the pure human line. This is why they established when you get up to Noah and said Noah was pure in all his generations.
Exactly.
This is why he was chosen. Then you go to all the genealogies after that. Why do the genealogies exist? To show that the pure human bloodline was established and existed in concurrence with a tainted, if you will, at least from the Hebrew theological point of view, a tainted bloodline by the children of Nicaea, the children of Cain. And this is why when you get all the way up to Mary, the mother of Jesus in the New Testament, what do the Christian followers do when they write these books? They trace Mary all the way back to Adam in the genealogical record. First they trace her to David, King David of Israel, because remember, after King David was on the throne, the messianic prophecy shifted a little bit and said, oh, well, the Messiah will also sprout from the rod of David, meaning he was going to be of the bloodline of David. And so the followers of Jesus had to establish that Jesus was of the royal line of David and actually had rights to be the king of Israel. And so they take Mary, his mother. They don't do it with Joseph, even though they trace his bloodlines too. But Joseph is supposed to be the stepdad, because Jesus was fathered by God. So they trace Mary's line all the way back to David, and then they trace David all the way back to Adam. Do they trace him through the bloodline of the firstborn Cain? No. Why not? They trace him through Seth and through Abel. Why do they do that? Because Cain was not of the pure human bloodline, and the whole story of the Old Testament was to establish that the bloodline of humanity had been tainted from the get-go, bang, right at creation, Nicaea, impregnating Eve, creating a dual bloodline, and they had to say the Messiah had to come from the pure human bloodline, so they had to trace that all the way through. So when you get out of the box, so to speak, a little bit and step back from it, and you look back in, you see just the Hebrew religion alone their version of this account that's found in 600 other ancient cultures, their version of this account linked to their Messiah. And they had to prove that the bloodlines existed, and they did this through the bloodline of the Messiah. So, once again, it creates a different picture of what you used to think. To say that the whole Adam and Eve account, the Garden of Eden, you can look at that as fact if you want. You can look at it as allegory. You can look at it as a religious mythological tale. The problem is you have the same couple represented in different names and different events all through all of human history, everybody else's cultures of the day, religions of the day. And what do they all do? They all say they were interrupted. The race was interrupted. And the way the Hebrew version carried that out was to show that that race interrupted was still pure in some sense to carry the line of their Messiah. And that's why it's there.
Okay, now we got a little bit of a debate going on in the chat room about this right now that I was kind of keeping track of. Mayreed is saying that the religion comes from the mother's side in Jewish tradition. Now, I'm thinking that she might be confused, and I could be wrong. She might be mixed up, and that the actual nationality comes from the mother's bloodline, while the religion could come from either. But she wanted me to mention that to you because of something you had said a minute ago.
I'm not sure exactly what she's referring to in that. I understand exactly what she means. But the source point of that, I've never heard that the religion comes from the mother. All I know is this, is that the Hebrew culture was very, not patriotic, what's the word I'm looking, patriarchal. And, it was a patriarchal society. And, you can see it in the way, Middle Eastern cultures, the way they treat women. And the Hebrew culture was no different. Now, there was some importance given to women, obviously, but what does religion teach you, Judeo-Christian religion? The fall of mankind happened because of Eve, but Adam was ultimately responsible. Eve was the one who committed the sin, but Adam followed suit, and the race didn't fall because of Eve, the race fell because of Adam's participation in what Eve started. So they blame it on the woman, in other words. So the Hebrew religion was patriarchal. So I'm not sure what exactly she's speaking to there, and I apologize if I'm not getting the full gist of where you're pulling your information from, but if it's coming close to answering that question or that debate at all, I do know a patriarchal society is what the Hebrews were. And
yeah, they definitely were that. Now, I was telling her in the chat room, and this is really just, to me, sounds mostly logical, not to mention what I've always been taught. And like I said, I'm open to the fact it could be wrong, that it would only make sense that because DNA and blood factors that nationality would go back to the mother. I mean, you know, the child and the mother both share the same blood. They come from the same womb or whatever. He comes from her womb. I mean, whereas in religion, that's not necessarily the case. And that's why I was thinking that way. But I'm open to studying, and it could be that both come from the mother, and I just never realized it, and I'm not really sure, and I don't want to, you know, state something as a fact to have, you know, be proven wrong later.
Right. You know, I saw a quote from, again, from Richard Feynman. He said, there's lots of things I know. He says, there's lots of things I don't know. He says, I know a little bit about this. I believe some things about that. He says, but about everything, I can't tell you I'm absolutely sure about anything at all. He says, and that's why I ask. He says, I ask and then I doubt. And when I ask and doubt, he says, that is where it's very hard for me to believe anything dogmatic. And so I keep asking the questions and I keep looking. Right. And that's really what this is about. What I have written about here, I'm going to tell this to your audience, and listen to this. I don't by any means say that I have the quintessential corner on any of this knowledge. This is just what I found. Much of this has been written about before. I'm one of the first ones I know of that's kind of put it together in the way I have. This is my viewpoints on it. This is the way I've interpreted this information and put it all together. But I liken it to this. I've just put another apple on the cart. Somebody in your audience or somebody else out there might put the next apple on the cart. This is all about discovery. It's all about investigating. It's all about researching and looking for the facts and then trying to, balance all those facts against the interpretations and against the religion and against the spiritualities and against the cultures. One thing you have to keep in mind on that point of culture, too, when you're interpreting or translating or looking for any of this information, especially when you go to scriptural texts, first thing you have to do, ancient texts, you have to look at what language it was written in. Then you have to look at to whom it was written, who was the audience, and what was the context that that audience would have understood it in, which might be very different than now. We have those debates just about our own Constitution in the United States. Well, look at the Second Amendment, it's the right to bear arms. Well, did that mean they had the right to hunt? Or, you see the gun control people against and the interpretation by modern extrapolation. But then you have to go back to the intent. What does it say in the Federalist Papers about the Second Amendment? It said that the Second Amendment was written so that the United States citizenry would always have a fail-safe or something to fall back on if the government should become tyrannical. That was why the right to bear arms was there. So you have to look at the intent and to whom it was written at the time, not to whom it's written today. What did it mean? That's the same thing you do with these biblical texts, with these ancient texts. You got to look at the context, the language, to whom it was written, and what those people would have had in their understanding at the time it was written. And that's why you see gaps and holes in things, because sometimes these writers wrote things in these ancient texts knowing that the people understood exactly what they were talking about.
Yeah, that is true. Well, I'll tell you what, while we were talking, she made the comment, the reason it is passed down through the maternal line is not just because it's easier to identify who your mother is, it is because the soul identity is more directly shaped by the mother than the father. From a purely physical perspective, a child is more directly connected to their mother. The father's contribution to the production of a child is instantaneous and remote. The mother, on the other hand, gives her very self to the child. The child is conceived inside the mother, develops inside of her, and is sustained and nourished by the mother, and is born from the mother. And she offers a link after that. So I would have to read a lot more on that there, but it's an interesting point.
It's an interesting point, and there's probably, and again, pardon the trains where I am located right now. Sorry about the noise. But the reason that you have, I think she's onto something, and the reason that you have any debate in this topic at all is because if that is so, if a child is more from the mother than from the father, that's starting to downplay the role of what the father adds to the mix. It's a 50-50. I'm sorry, a child might be, no offense to your listener there, but a child is as much a child of the father as he is a child of the mother. The mother may carry the child and share many things genetically with that child, but that child would be nothing without the input of the father. The mother can carry a child, but she can't create it on her own.
Well, so as far as the part about the soul, that would have to be theoretical.
And I was going to say, where she mentions the soul, that's the spiritual, well, this is what I think. Because we have no way to quantify that. We don't know where the soul comes from. You look at science won't even tell you they think the soul exists. So that's all very subjective data when it comes to that. We can believe that, and we might be right about that on the spiritual level, but there's no way to quantify that. So that you got to cast that aside as a fact. Although we may believe that as a fact spiritually, we can't prove it and quantify it. You can prove the physical aspects of that. But that does not deny what cultures did despite that. They may say that a child came from a mother, but it was the father who was in charge. And that's why you had patriarchal cultures. The Hebrew culture was patriarchal in nature. They did not degrade what a woman did, but they did not hold it as high as the father's bloodline. That's why all the names are even into American culture or current culture. It's changing a little bit, but why is it when women marry a man, they take the man's name? It's a patriarchal thing. It's the remnants of our patriarchal society. Whether that's right, wrong, good, or bad. That's the way it's been done. That is a thing that we have put on top of it. So maybe physically, yeah, a child is formed by its mother, but that child wouldn't even be in the mother without the man. So I believe it's a 50-50. although the woman's got the lion's share of the work to do.
Right. Okay. Now, while you were talking, Anthony Sanchez just happened to try to call in, and I don't think he was
aware. He just tried to call me, too.
No, I don't think he was trying to call you. I think he was trying to reach me because I've been negotiating conferences with him over the last month or so, and I think he might have been trying to reach me about that and wasn't aware I was, live on the air at the time. But it reminded me that I wanted to talk to you also while you're here, because I believe you got two conferences coming up, one with Micah Hanks, and he's going to be on my show further down the road in the future. We're going to talk about that, in fact. And I think you're also going to be on Anthony Sanchez's conference as well, aren't you?
Yes. Well, as a matter of fact, he just, as I was talking to you a few minutes ago, he beeped in, and I, of course, didn't pick it up. So he tried to call us both in the last 10 or 15 minutes here.
Maybe he was trying to reach us about the show.
Not sure what. But Anthony has the Sacramento UFO Convention, SACUFOcon.com, and that is Anthony's website. That's taking place June 16th and 17th in Sacramento, and I'll be speaking there, as well as Micah Hanks, who is my partner in Intrepid Magazine, and also my partner in Paradigm Symposium, which I'll talk to you about in a second. But you've got guys like Stanton Friedman there, Mel Fabregas. You've got several. You have to go to SACUFO.com and take a look at the site, and you can see all the fabulous speakers that are going to be there that weekend. That's Anthony Sanchez's event, and it's going to be a phenomenal little event in Sacramento. And now I've got my own conference coming up in October, the 18th through the 21st. And it's sponsored by or hosted by, presented by Intrepid Magazine. And Micah Hanks is my partner in Intrepid Magazine. He is also my partner in this event. And the Paradigm Symposium. And if you like the stuff that we've been talking about today, you look to the ancient alien theorizing and ancient mysteries and so on. We've got an amazing lineup of speakers. We have Eric von Daniken, who wrote Chariots of the Gods 40-plus years ago, is going to be there speaking with us. His first American appearance in over 8 years, I believe. We've got George Norrie from Coast to Coast Radio. We've got Giorgio Tsoukalos, Bill Burns, Philip Coppens from the History Channel show Ancient Aliens. We've got Ian Punnett, who has done the weekend Coast to Coast. We've got 10 other authors that you'd recognize. We've got John Ventry from MUFON, Nick Redfern, prolific author, Marie D. Jones, Larry Flaxman, Laird Scranton, Paul Von Ward, Dr. John Ward, archaeologist, anthropologist from Egypt. We've got this fantastic lineup. And if you're interested in this kind of thing, the symposium, October 18th through 21st in Minneapolis, go to ParadigmSymposium.com, and that's PARADIGM Symposium.com. Or you can just go to IntrepidMag.com, our magazine site, and click on the Paradigm Symposium link there.
Also, I'm going to be posting that on my website as well. And I'm also going to be interviewing a good-sized chunk of Anthony's speakers that's coming up on that. And he's also asked me to be at the event via Skype to ask his guests questions or his speakers questions and interview them, what have you. So I'm taking questions from anybody that may want to ask any of Anthony's guests any questions. Now, as far as that goes, Scott, I might want to talk to you later on about if you have any, speakers you'd like me to bring on my show and let them talk about your conference.
Absolutely.
Yeah, actually, when did you say your conference was again?
I'm sorry, say that again?
When did you say your conference was again?
It's October 18th through the 21st. It's in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And it will be, it's coming up. It's about 6 months away now. And I would highly recommend, if you want to come to this event, take a look now and start planning it out. Tickets are moving.
Well, I'm not able to travel much. That's why Anthony's having me do this via Skype. I'm on disability, and I don't even drive right now. So I do most of what I do from the house.
It's hard to do it, yeah. Well, we'll talk about that later. We've got some other options in there too. So, well, I hate to say this, but I'm approaching a point where I may have to ditch on you in this interview now. And I appreciate your having me on. Is there anything else you wanted to hit before I've got to take off?
Well, I do want to mention to you that I thought you and me have had a great chemistry during this here interview.
Absolutely.
Huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I thought it was a very lively conversation, and I think it would be just fantastic to have you back. I'd love to do it again. If you want to go more in depth about the Nephilim, we can. If you want to, I especially want you back when you get your next book out.
As soon as that comes out, I'd love to talk to you. After the middle of July, I'll be freed up after that and have a lot more information we can talk about. And as for now, if there's any of your listeners who would like to talk with me, share information, take me to task, you can get a hold of me by just going to intrepidmag.com. And believe it or not, my phone number, this very phone I'm talking on, is even listed on there. So if you want to talk to me, just give me a call or shoot me an email.
Well, I'll tell you right now,
find me on Twitter.
My listeners aren't bashful. They'll take me or you or anybody else. No, but I love it. I really do. I think it's great.
Well, Royce, I want to thank you for having me. I'm sorry I've got to blast off, but I do. And I appreciate the time, appreciate the conversation.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate you being here. And I'll be in touch, and I'll be sending you links to where I post this at YouTube mode and in my archive.
That sounds great.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Royce. I'll talk to you soon, brother.
You too.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, everybody, I'm sorry that we ended up running out of time. I thought the show was going just fantastic until the time clock ran out on us. But before y'all get out of here, let's remind you once again that his website is www.intrepidmag.com. And I will be posting the link, I don't have it in front of me, to his conference later today or tomorrow. Probably tomorrow because I'm in the middle of cooking right after the show. And also, I want to remind everybody that my next show is going to be Tuesday. And let me come to that real quick like. I had the schedule in front of me a minute ago. Yes, I got this down. It's going to be Mysteries of the Multiverse and the Mind with Thomas Weston. And I think it's a very promising topic. He's going to be about the third person to talk about something pretty similar on this. I'm going to be back in touch with Anthony Sanchez later today or tomorrow. And we're going to talk more about the upcoming, conference that he has in Sacramento. Don't forget, if y'all got some questions on that, send it to me at redneckradioman@comcast.net. You can also reach me at, my cell phone is 713-859-5762, because as a rule of thumb, I don't often answer my Skype number because I usually save that for the show. Don't forget to go to the menu on the left and click on Friends, and you'll see a list of banners on there to friends of mine that have social networks or forums. One of them is the Alien and UFO Community. These banners are all linked. The other is the supernaturalufo.com. And then there's United Paranormal International. These are places where I'm a member. I think the folks are just great. They've always been nice to me. They got some fantastic members there. There's a lot to learn. And also, underneath the one that says Friends, underneath advertising, there's one that says Radio Favorites. If you'll click on that one, there's some more banners. And on that one there, you'll see UK PN Radio. And that's run by Gary Brown, I think was his last name. It's been a long time since I had him on my show, but I think that's what it was. You'll see the one to JimHarold.com. And he's been on my show, and he's a fantastic radio host. And then there's the Gradian Report with Micah Hanks. Me and Scott were just talking about him. And then there's Ohio Politics Radio with Mark, and he's a fantastic host as well, Mark Hamill. And I encourage you people to check these folks out. I think you'll enjoy it. And for those that aren't able to make the show live, don't forget we do archive, and I do have a YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and type in Mr. Paranormal, all lowercase. I really prefer people catch the show live because then you can chat and, participate in the show, ask questions, what have you. But I do understand for those that aren't able to make a live show, YouTube is another way to find me, as well as the archives I have here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and call this show a quit for right now and go cook dinner. And I want to thank you all for coming, and y'all have a fantastic day. And I want to remind y'all, I couldn't have a show without you any more than I could without my guests. Have a great day. Thank you very much.